5 years. Has it really been that long? Well, yes. On June 9th, 2021, Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis would make its worldwide debut, ushering in a new era for the beloved online RPG. So how exactly did we get here? Well, that story begins in 2017, a year of many milestones. Nintendo would reassert itself as console royalty with the release of the Switch early that year. PSO2 was turning 5 that summer, and several iconic franchises, including Phantasy Star, would celebrate the Big 3-0. PSO2 Episode 5 rolled out in Japan that summer and went on to receive negative responses throughout the year. The official PSO2.com teaser site went offline at the tail end of that year. By then, any hope for an official Western release had already vanished. By this time, overseas fans who had been waiting for the game had either jumped on the Japanese servers or just moved on altogether. Also by that time, the last Phantasy Star game to be officially brought outside Asia was Phantasy Star Portable 2. The Phantasy Star crew had a very full plate around that time. Not only were they juggling work on episodes 5 and 6, but also laying the groundwork for what would become NGS. By 2019, there had been whisperings of a major overhaul to the game, including several shifts in leadership. Yuya Kimura would be made series producer, while Daiki Hamazaki would assume the role of director for this new project. 2019 was a rather slow year for PSO2 despite Episode 6 rolling out. By that time, development on NGS was starting to ramp up. Players still enjoyed Episode 6 despite being reliant on reused assets, but 2019 would bring a major shakeup that fans were not expecting.
Those of you who have played Phantasy Star know that this game had influenced many of the most popular games today. So with great delight, we welcome Sega back to our stage and Phantasy Star back on Xbox.
After years of logistical challenges and failed endeavors throughout Asia, Phantasy Star Online 2, the actual game, was finally headed westward. More details about PSO2's Western release would surface throughout the back half of that year. The game would have cross-play between PC and Xbox players, much like how PC and PlayStation folks could play together in Japan. However, Xbox One owners would get first dibs on the game, with PC players to follow soon after. The closed beta kicked off in February of 2020 with an open beta the following month, but unlike other betas, players actually got to keep their progress into the final game. PSO2 officially launched on Xbox One in April of 2020 with PC support the following month thanks to the Microsoft Store. PSO2's initial North American offering was a rather interesting chimera. Not only were the first 3 story episodes made available right off the rip, but also several quality of life and balance changes from the latter episodes. Around that time, the Japanese devs made a rather interesting announcement about the game's future, simply calling it not Episode 7. This was also around the time that Corona had popped off and several companies began working remotely, and Sega was no exception. Of course, this adjustment would cause several hiccups in their production pipeline. There were several high-profile games rolling out that year, so gamers had plenty to keep them busy while they were stuck at home. It wouldn't be long before we learned what Sega meant by not Episode 7, with the unveiling of New Genesis in July of that year. The reception to the unveiling was largely positive. More details about NGS would surface throughout the back half of 2020 while the global version continued to receive major content updates. Sega would assuage players' concerns by announcing that everyone's hard-earned cosmetics and emotes would carry over into the new game, but character progression was completely separate though. The graphics engine and character customization also received a major overhaul. The closed beta test received high marks for graphics, character customization, and mobility from players on both sides of the Pacific. On June 9th, 2021, Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis made its worldwide debut. Unlike the base game, players from both regions received updates at the same time, but Japan was still roped off from everyone else due to international gambling laws. Even in the wake of a global release, there were still some players who didn't completely switch over. those players faced an additional hurdle in the form of a geo-block. NGS released with a single region, 6 classes, and a short story chapter. The maximum level was 20. NGS offered players far greater mobility, and the open world took full advantage of this. The game had a very strong first week, and Phantasy Star brand awareness was at an all-time high. They rolled out the Braver class in August, followed by Bouncer in October. The first major update that brought the Retem region would drop in December that year. But as with any new online game, the honeymoon phase is short-lived. And if you had your ear to the ground in the community in those first 6 months, you'd know that the fans on both sides of the Pacific were not pleased. And they weren't exactly bashful about airing their grievances. While players felt the game had an enjoyable foundation, they breezed through everything it had to offer within the first 2 weeks. Many players also experienced crippling lag and bugs. On top of that, there were several important quality of life features from the base game that weren't here. The blowback prompted Sega to add more content in between major updates and bring back the missing quality of life features. June 2022 brought the Kavaris region, plus some non-combat elements. In August of that year, the long-awaited Summoner class would make its return to NGS as the Waker. Just like the other classes, the Waker had a much more streamlined toolkit than its base game counterpart. The end of that month also brought the global PS4 rollout with it. The tail end of December would bring the Styria region, making all 4 main regions available. By this time, the game had begun to feel more complete, but some players weren't completely satisfied, especially when it came to the game's story. One major grievance from the community at the time centered around our character being relegated to no more than the proverbial wing beneath everyone else's wings. 2023 would serve as a major turning point for the game. NGS had mostly been its own thing up till then, but it would finally receive the long sought after narrative connective tissue in April of that year. The Gunblade also made its long awaited comeback with the stylish and dynamic Slayer. June of that year brought version 2 and sweeping changes to the game. June also brought with it the long awaited player housing overhaul dubbed Creative Spaces. This took the popular personal quarters, aka My Room, from base game and cranked it up to 11. PSO2 NGS allowed its players to express their creativity in even more fun ways. The introduction of creative spaces gave rise to several community events like fashion shows and dance parties. Players gathered together and performed dance emotes within these creative spaces while one person live streamed music as a DJ. On some evenings, there would be multiple DJs who raided into each other in a specific order. This was akin to Final Fantasy XIV's club scene that took hold during the pandemic. Even a handful of DJs from FF14 played sets on PSO2. Ship 1 on Global would earn the reputation of being the party ship within the first year. August of that year would introduce high difficulty standing quests, the first of which being Dark Falls Solace. These fights had punishing mechanics along with a 5 death limit and a 15-minute timer. However, the reward structure in these earlier iterations left much to be desired. This would also be the year that gave us LaCiel exploration as part of our daily content loop. 2024 brought several changes to the game, including augment transfers and the introduction of Dark Falls Dalian. We'd also get the Nameless City, which further served to bridge the narrative gap between the base game and NGS. We'd also be introduced to the Mars weapon system. Several classes and weapons received some much-needed adjustments throughout the back half of that year. 2025 would be a slower year compared to previous years, fueling speculation that many people on the NGS team were diverted elsewhere. It did bring more balance and quality of life changes though. While the issue of meaningful loot from the hard 4-man quests was mostly addressed, the game's overall content lacked any real staying power. This had been a long-standing pain point for the game, and the reason for the majority of the flack it's received over the years. 2026 would be an important year. After all, this is the 5th anniversary. 2026 promised a tighter content loop going forward, story updates every 4 months, and ultra-hard 4-man quests every 2 months. Sega put out a financial report in May of 2026, officially announcing the cancellation of the enigmatic Super game. That report also stated that several personnel were reassigned to existing live service projects. The roadmap for the first half of this year and that report seemed to corroborate the theory that NGS resources were sent elsewhere, but that hasn't served to assuage the skepticism of a small yet vociferous subset of the community. Will things start to shift in the coming years? Only time will tell. It's certainly been a wild ride. To wrap this up, I thought it would be fun to ask an important question. Did Sega truly do the right thing with a continuation of PSO2 via NGS instead of a fresh PSO3? To answer that, you have to look at where the game was when the initial planning first kicked off, and then you have to look at the game's predecessors. Let's consider that PSO2 began development in 2008, right around the time that PSU was in its prime. PSU was in service for 6 years, and PSO2 was already out by the time it sunset. They already had the off-ramp in place. Let's also consider that these games were products of their time. Let's also consider that NGS entered development 5 years into the base game's lifecycle in Japan, and by that time, several players had already dumped hundreds of thousands, if not millions of yen into cosmetics and other things. So a fresh PSO3 at that juncture may have been a hard sell. PSO2 has run several collaboration scratches in Japan that have never been repeated. So anyone who missed the boat on those was SOL. A full-blown PSO3 running at the same time as PSO2 would have resulted in a fractured player base. Even Hiro Arai said this back in 2021. And let's not forget, building one of these games from scratch is very costly, and thus a huge gamble. And had this hypothetical PSO3 failed, well, it might have been the end of Phantasy Star as we know it, both in Japan and abroad. As much as we lament the current state of things, it could have been far worse. So, did they make the right call here? All things considered, yes. For the global side, it gave them a chance to experience the original game, albeit on a much more accelerated timeline. It also gave both sides a chance to experience this new adventure together, while still hearkening back to its roots. So yes, NGS is here to stay, whether you like it or not. As always, thanks for watching, and keep shooting for the stars. And remember, to thy non-self be true. Until next time, farewell.